Quiverful Ministry welcomes you to Fertility Conference 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, Eme Odo Akenzua. Eme Odo Akenzua is a wife, mother, social reformer, author, and fashion entrepreneur. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, from where she proceeded to study millinery under the private tutelage of Rose Corey, the late Queen Mother's milliner, in the UK between 1989 and 1992. Eme returned to Nigeria to set up John 3 verse 3 hats in 1993. Eme's work have featured on CNN, BBC, ITV, MBC One Dubai, British Airways and Air France Flights magazines, and several other glossy national and international print media. Her designs have featured in world-famous events like the Royal Ascot, exhibitions like the renowned Burjuman Millinery Exhibition in Dubai, the Chelsea Millinery Exhibition in the UK, USA, and Nigeria. Eme's handcrafted masterpieces adorn the heads of celebrities and women of influence within and outside Nigeria. Side by side her thriving fashion business, Eme is actively and passionately involved in the welfare of orphans and vulnerable children, OVC. She is driven by the need to ensure every OVC in Nigeria has access to life's basic necessities, including being in the care of loving parents through adoption and fostering. Eme is at the forefront of pioneering the work on educating people on the benefits of adoption in Nigeria through her Joy of Adoption platform and books. She has been Managing Trustee and Project Coordinator of Heritage Homes Orphanage, Lagos, since its inception in 2004, and Heritage Adoption Support and Advocacy Group since 2016. Eme is married with 2 children. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fertility Conference 2022, Eme Odo Akenzua.
Today, and it's nice to be on this session. My name is Eme Akenzua. I'm a wife, mother, a social reformer. I am very passionate about the orphaned and vulnerable child in our society specifically, and I believe very firmly that every child belongs in a loving home. It's not a privilege, it's a right. And one of the ways that we can place children in loving homes is through adoption. And of course, fostering is another way. I want to thank very much Mrs. Abagun for inviting me to be a part of this very laudable project. And well done. And yes, God bless you for what you're doing. Now, I've been asked to speak on adoption, the myths and truths about adoption. I'll start first by defining adoption. Adoption is when an adult takes permanent and legal responsibility for a child that is not theirs biologically. And what that simply means is going to take a child and you have legal rights over the child because you've gone through the entire process of adopting the child properly through the courts and the ministry, as is the case usually here in Nigeria. Now, when an adopted child has the same rights by law as a biological child. Now, there are many myths in our society. As we know, adoption is still something that is growing in our society. There's still a large stigma associated with adoption in Nigeria, and it's something that we are working on. I have been in this field for some 20 years as managing trustee of the Heritage Homes Orphanage, which is located here in Lagos State. So I speak largely from experience. Now, there's a myth, or there's a stigma rather, associated with adoption in our society. And that stigma affects the way people look at adoption. And it's basically the fact that people are so unforgiving towards women who cannot have children biologically, and that is quite unfair for the simple reason that most women who suffer from infertility have not done anything in particular to be in that position. They do not wish it for themselves. They wish they had children biologically. And it's a very painful position to be in. I went through that for 7 years. I would have repeated miscarriages. I had 4 miscarriages, and at late stages, 5.5 months, until eventually after 7 years, I had a biological child. So I understand the pain any woman would go through who doesn't have a child. And we should be more forgiving and compassionate, empathic towards them, not feeling sorry, but being empathic towards anyone who's going through such a situation. I'll start first by discussing some of the myths on adoption. There is the common view that an adopted child is different from a biological child. Now, that is not true. A child is a child, is a child, is a child, is my opinion. All children are gifts from God. The only difference between a child who's adopted and a biological child is the fact that in the case of the adopted child, the biological parents have relinquished them for one reason or the other, and that's all. That's the difference. They were made by God. They've got fingers, they've got eyes, they've got eyes, legs, whatever any biological child has, an adopted child has also. Now, a second myth I hear a lot from people is that adoption is only for those who do not have children or cannot have children biologically. Yes, in a lot of the cases here in Nigeria, more than 90% of the cases of people who adopt, it's really because they cannot have children biologically, or they've suffered from secondary infertility and want to, which means that they've had a child biologically and then want to grow their family by having a second or a third child, so they decide to adopt if they cannot continue to have children biologically. But definitely adoption is for anyone who has had a large enough heart to love a child that is not theirs biologically. There is no reason why anyone cannot adopt. If you have the resources, you have an empty nest, or you just can take in another child and give a child a loving home in a caring environment, why not? What stops you from doing that? Okay, so another myth that I often hear is that all kids relinquished by their biological mother have health issues, and that's not necessarily true. In some cases, yes, it is true. A mother who has a child who has a disability would want to abandon that child because she fears that she might not be able to take care of the child properly. But in most cases, children are relinquished by their mothers because it's either a pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, also the fact that a father is not known for the child, and that would bring a big problem in the family. The stigma of the child growing up without the knowledge of who the child's biological father is. And so people give up children for various reasons. Sometimes the mother's not well, or she feels she cannot take it for economic reasons, where a mother feels she cannot give the child what the child requires to grow up, to be the sort of child that she wants the child to be. So she decides to give the child up for adoption. So those are some of the reasons. So it's not always the fact that a child has health issues. So I think that we need to get rid of that. Another myth I find very often spoken about by people is that don't adopt a child that is older than a year old, you would hear people say now. And the reason being that, or they give, is that the child will not be able to settle into a new home or with new parents. That's not true. I have seen in my experience children, a child as old as 13, settle properly into a new family. I'm not saying that there are no challenges. There are challenges, obviously, with an older child, because the child, especially if the child has moved from one environment to the other. But if the child has had some stability, and I refer to not being moved too many times. For instance, when the child was relinquished, ended up in an orphanage or wherever for whatever period the child was in, and then eventually goes into, there has been some stability in that child's life. Yes, I agree that children can pick up things in an institution such as an orphanage, but largely I think that, or what I have found in my experience, is that when an adult who adopts a child takes on the responsibility seriously, is prepared to spend adequate time with the child and give the child all the love the child requires, any child can settle into any home much quicker than a child who does not have any of these things. So what I'm basically saying, if you get a child who's 12 months old, 10 months old, and you leave the child to be raised by a nanny, and you're not there giving the child all the support the child requires, you're not going to have a child who's well balanced and settled. And that happens with biological children also. We know parents who are very busy out there working, and a nanny is raising the child, and the child is not the way the child ought to be. So I don't think that is specific to an adopted child, but I admit that there are some issues you will need to deal with. Something else I hear people often say is it's better to adopt a female child rather than a male child. And the reason they give is the fact that they believe that male children are more prone to all kinds of vices, such as drugs, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, joining a gang, or becoming a rapist, an armed robber, and all of that sort of thing. And that is very unlikely a female child will go that way. But again, I want to say that it's the responsibility lies on the adults to raise the child in the way the child should go. If you were to get pregnant, you do not choose the child that is coming into your womb. It's what God gives to you that you take, and then you take on the responsibility of raising that child the way you ought to raise the child. So I don't think that people should go out specifically for a female child for that reason. Rather, resolve in your mind to do what's right to raise that child to be a healthy and responsible member of a society. The other thing I often hear people say is, when I adopt a child, God will give me my own child. Now, the first thing I say is that the child you've adopted isn't your own child. And do we need to use a child to gamble with God, that so that it's not a good reason for you to adopt a child, because you need to use that child to get God to do what you want God to do for you? I think that's totally unfair, and we can all relate to that. None of us likes to know that we have been chosen, someone's chosen us as a friend because of what the person can get from us. You know, it's not a nice feeling at all. You don't want to be in that position. So why do that to a child? I think that's very unkind. We ought to adopt children for the mere fact that you can give the child a loving home, and you can also enjoy the benefits of being a parent. You know, all of the benefits that come with being a parent. Another myth, and I think a very important one to address, is the fact that a number of Christians believe that if they decide to adopt a child, they are saying God has failed, or it seems as if they lack the faith to continue to trust God to answer their prayers. I don't think that's the case. God is God. He can choose to bless you with a child biologically or through adoption. After all, the Son of God, Jesus Christ himself, was sent in both ways. Mary was his biological mother, and Joseph was not his biological father. Joseph adopted Jesus. There's no biological link between them. But interestingly, when the genealogy of Jesus is traced, it's actually traced through Joseph and not Mary, just to show us how valuable adoption is to God. And I want to remind us also that God first adopted us before we began to adopt. We're adopted children of God. Those who believe in Christ Jesus as their Lord and Savior are adopted by God, and we see examples in the Bible of people like Moses and Esther who were adopted. So adoption is beautiful in the eyes of God and is a legitimate way of increasing your family or even starting a family at all. So adopting a child does not mean God has failed you, and it also does not mean that you lack faith in God. It might just be the path that God has chosen for you to travel in this journey of life. For whatever reason, God chooses to do that. And I want to speak to some of the truths about adoption. Adoption is not for everybody. No, I don't believe that. And if you do choose not to adopt, don't feel guilty about it. If you've prayed, you've sorted yourself, and you feel that's not the way that you want to go, that's fine. Because I think it's really important to understand if you can truly love a child that doesn't come from your womb, or a biological child, the way you would love an adopted child. And it's only fair to be honest with yourself and with everyone who you're dealing with, so that you do not take a child into your home and hurt that child badly. Now, I want to say that adoption is very, very rewarding. One thing I hear everyone say all the time who have adopted children is, I wish I had done this much earlier. It's common. I don't think I've met anyone in my 20 years who has not said that. Because at the end of the day, they find out that a child is just a child. And it's the environment, the love, the care you give to the child that makes all the difference. So for those of you who are considering adoption, I want to say to you, it's a very rewarding experience, and you should go head on and pursue the process for adopting the child. Fortunately, unfortunately, there would be people who would not have biological children because God has decided it will be that way. I want to close by saying that in some cases, God needs somebody who can take a child from one environment into a different environment so that that child can fulfill their purpose. We see that example with Moses and with Esther in the Bible. I would use Moses' example. Moses, I often wonder what would have happened, how God would have delivered his people if Moses had not been brought into the palace through adoption. Pharaoh's daughter, as we know, adopted Moses and brought Moses into the palace. And so Moses grew up with Pharaoh and understood the way of the palace, the ways of the Egyptians. And so he was the right person for God to send to deliver his people. I doubt that a slave, which was the status of the Israelites in Egypt, they were slaves. I doubt that a slave who had grown up in Goshen, which was where the Israelites were, would have been able to stand up to Pharaoh and confront Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, let God's people go. I doubt he would have been able to do it. Moses was able to do it because he had lived with Pharaoh, he had lived in the palace, and it was no big deal to go back and ask Pharaoh to let God's people go. The same thing happened with Esther. What if Mordecai did not adopt Esther and take her away from her environment into his own environment? Mordecai was very important to the part that Esther played in the palace. Even getting her into the palace was his idea. and also guiding her while she was in the palace. He said to her, perhaps you've come to this place for such a time as this. Now, Esther was not sent to the palace just to be a beautiful woman sitting there. She was adopted by Mordecai because God needed somebody who would one day be able to save his people from annihilation, which was the case at the time when Esther was in the palace. And she was able, through her association or being wife to, what's his name, her husband, I can't remember his name now, being his wife, to be able to stand up to the king and say, listen, this is the case. My people are about to be destroyed and removed from the face of this earth. So I want to say to you out there who's considering this, perhaps God needs you to do something like that for him. And the only way he can do this is through adoption, by you going to take a child from an environment and bring into your home, because God trusts you. God knows that you can raise that child to be the child that he wants the child to be able to fulfill the purpose for which that child has come into this world. Well, God bless you, and thank you for listening to this. And Mrs. Abagun, thank you again for the opportunity.
So somebody is asking, what are the steps to adoption in Lagos? I'm sure that question will go to Mrs. Akenzua. What are the steps to adoption in Lagos? I think this is a really, really important one, because many people like it's so complicated that they are not interested in going through it. And some people actually say it's actually complicated. So maybe this would be a good question for those interested in adoption is, what are the steps, especially for Lagos?
Okay, good question. I want to first start by saying, don't be discouraged. Anything that has a starting point has an end point. So the sooner you start, the better. And I would dare say that it would probably be not more than a year, anything from, I've known people to get their approval letters from Lagos State as early as 3 months. And then if you don't follow the process through for properly, it could take more than a year. So it's really up to you first and foremost. And first and foremost, you go to Lagos State with your spouse. They do not deal with people, if you're married, that is, they wouldn't deal with you as a single person if you have a spouse. So if you're going, you go with your spouse. And it's the Ministry of Youth and Social Development allows. So you go there and you take an application saying you would want to adopt a child for so and so reason. It's just a page. You don't have to do more than a page. And the reason why you want to adopt a child. And they would give you a list of documents. They're not difficult. Of course, you know, Lagos State, you have to have your tax clearance for like 3 years, your tax papers for 3 years. You need to show proof of income, and asking that doesn't mean you have to have some millions of naira in your account. All it basically is that you have some amount of money to show that you can take care of a child with, and it's not a lot. They're not fussy. Your marriage certificate, of course, and some basic documents like that. And after you submit it, a lot of people say, oh, you know, it's expensive. It isn't. If you want to do it legally, and I really do employ you to do so, I think it's just about 80,000 pay. You would need to go for counseling sessions, and in Alausa or the ministry, they do not deal with a couple or individual alone. They batch you up. So it could be about 200 couples. And you go for counseling, the whole counseling sessions. You have to come in, they come to you, do inspection in your home, and they ask you also to go for medicals in the state hospital. So these are some of the steps you go through. They're not insurmountable. It's worth doing. You want a child, so stay on it. And if you do stay on it, I believe in about 3 months, less than 3 months, you should be able to give in all your documents within a week or two. And the rest of it is an invitation to come in for counseling and other sessions, and then they come to your house. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you.